Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Thielman, the President and CEO of the International Institute of New England, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, On the Ground and in the Courts, Responding to Federal Attacks on Refugee Protections. Since it was first formalized in 1980, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program has received widespread bipartisan support. Individuals of all political backgrounds have agreed that welcoming people fleeing danger and persecution is the right and American thing to do. Over the past 45 years, the program has saved the lives of more than 3 million people. Here at IINE, our staff and community supporters have helped thousands of refugees to put down roots, learn English, and find jobs. These refugees have become our friends and co-workers, taxpayers, engaged community members, and in many cases, United States citizens. Devastatingly, the federal administration has made it its mission to dismantle the refugee program as we know it and strip refugees who are already a part of our communities of their rights and safety. Today, we'll spend some time covering some of the most disruptive and alarming policy changes that we've seen and how organizations like IINE are responding. Two quick notes. This webinar is recorded and we'll share it by email. And we are asking you to use the Q&A feature throughout the webinar, and we will answer as many questions as we can after the panel discussion. So I want to talk briefly about our mission. The International Institute's mission has not really changed much over our 100-year history. We create opportunities for refugees and immigrants to succeed through resettlement, education, career advancement, and pathways to citizenship. Resettlement is a broad term, but it applies specifically to refugees as well as to all the people we welcome. And education includes adult education, education programs we have for youth. Career advancement involves both placing people in jobs and helping them advance in their careers, and pathways to citizenship is our immigration legal services program. Our theory of change is that we resettle people, we welcome them to the United States and New England, we stabilize them through education programming and career programming, and then we help them to integrate, though that's a long process, specifically through our immigration legal services program. I want to thank everyone on the call today who is listening in for the role you play in helping the International Institute of New England do its job. The many stakeholders and supporters who are listening, we appreciate all you do, all the volunteers, all you do to support our work. We cannot do this work alone. Now on to who you'll hear from during our webinar. I'll soon be joined by Alexandra Weber, IINE's Senior Vice President and Chief Advancement Officer, who has dedicated her career to supporting refugees, first as a social worker, working directly with our clients, and now as the head of our fundraising, advocacy, and communications efforts. You will also hear from Erez Reuveni, Senior Counsel at Democracy Forward, a national organization that advances democracy through litigation, policy, and public education, and regulatory engagement. Erez is also the former acting Deputy Director of the Office of Immigration Litigation at the United States Department of Justice and has overseen and litigated some of the most consequential immigration cases in the United States. He is the lead case counsel on a federal lawsuit that IINE and others have filed to stop the unlawful detention of refugees. And we'll talk more about that later in this program. Next, we have Rebecca LaPierre, IINE's Director of Immigration and Legal Services, who joined our team earlier this year after serving as a staff attorney at the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. Rebecca now leads our legal team and works daily with refugees navigating an increasingly complex and hostile immigration system. And finally, innocent Ndagijimana, a former refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo, who was resettled in New Hampshire by IINE over 10 years ago and who is now a valued member of our education team and our Manchester, New Hampshire office. These panelists will provide insights into the impact of federal policies on refugees and how IINE and like-minded organizations are responding, both on the ground and in the courts. Before we get to that discussion, we want to make sure we all have an understanding of who refugees are. I'm going to turn it over now to Alexandra, goes by Zan Weber, to provide us with an overview.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you for everyone who's joining us today for this very important and we think informative conversation. Um, so when we talk about refugees, we're talking about a group of people with a very specific legal status that comes with a very extensive application process. By definition, legal definition, refugees have been forced to leave their home countries and are unable or unwilling to return, usually for fear, because of a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or a political opinion. According to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, there are 42.5 million refugees worldwide. That number continues to grow because of conflicts, human rights crises, and climate change, all of which push people out of their homes. Forced to flee, some individuals wait years, even decades, before they are officially determined and defined as refugees by the global body, such as the United Nations Refugee Agency. The agency that refers the individual to a country for resettlement. As you can see on the screen, being admitted to the US as a refugee requires a multi-step vetting process, which takes 18 to 36 months on average. It's the most extensive and vigorous process any immigrant to the US endures. And right now, the refugee admissions program has been suspended by the president for nearly all populations. So, when refugees are finally admitted to the US and during times when they're allowed to enter, they rarely arrive with more than a single suitcase. They need initial support to get on their feet, but they're authorized to work as soon as they arrive in the US. And in a short amount of time, the majority join our workforce in all of our industries. Extensive data shows that over time, refugee earnings increase substantially, and they end up contributing far more to our economy than they ever receive in initial support. But why is it important for the US to resettle refugees? We argue that as a country built on freedom and equality, the US holds an obligation to welcome individuals fleeing persecution in pursuit of safety and opportunity. And beyond the humanitarian motivations, there are also strategic reasons to maintain the US refugee admissions program. As I mentioned, refugees are critical to our economy. They help maintain population growth, and they start new businesses at a higher rate than even US-born residents. Resettlement is also a diplomatic strategy of the US government. By welcoming and resettling refugees, our country demonstrates a commitment to providing refuge to those at risk, which in turn helps to ensure that other countries do the same and that they will support US citizens should the need arise. It's also important to note that refugee resettlement is popular with the majority of Americans, as Jeff mentioned earlier. Nearly 7 in 10 voters across the US say that they support the US having a refugee resettlement program. That includes almost 80% of Democrats, almost 70% of independents, and almost 60% of Republicans. To understand where the refugee program stands currently, though, we're going to turn now to Erez Reuveni to explain the circumstances.
Thank you, Zan, and great to be here with everyone today on this important topic. As we've all seen since January of last year, this iteration of the Trump administration has really turbocharged its attacks on immigrants on multiple fronts. In comparison to his first presidency, Trump has significantly escalated his tactics. Not only has the administration abandoned this nation's solemn promise through the 1980 Refugee Act to never again turn away those seeking refuge on our shores, it has moved to strip the thousands of resettled refugees admitted to this country since 2021 of their rights and status. First, the administration has sought to completely shut down refugee admissions other than for white South Africans. Through an executive order issued in the first days of the Trump-Vance administration, the federal government indefinitely suspended the refugee admissions program and attempted to pause all funding for U.S. resettlement agencies, including IINE. A class action lawsuit brought by International Refugee Assistance Project, or IRAP, in Seattle, Pasito v. Trump, challenged these actions. The lawsuit has significant initial success. Court orders stopped the refugee admissions ban and the funding pause. Ultimately, however, a panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals largely vacated these court orders, concluding that the president had legal authority to suspend refugee admissions and cancel funding to overseas operations. However, on a more positive note, the panel upheld the court orders as to domestic funding, meaning funding to resettlement agencies like IINE was restored, and refugees who were already in the United States would receive the support they had been promised. The case remains ongoing, with an amended complaint raising new facts filed by IRAP in April of this year. Second, the administration has weaponized the immigration laws against individual refugees in really unprecedented ways. Last year, the Department of Homeland Security, and specifically two of its subcomponents, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, launched what they dubbed Operation Paris in Minnesota. The agencies alleged, without any evidence, that thousands of refugees who were admitted to the United States after careful and extensive vetting through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program since 2021 procured their refugee admissions through fraud or criminality. Relying on these public claims of fraud and criminality, again, lacking any evidentiary basis, and a common tactic the Trump-Vance administration deploys against migrant communities, ICE began going door to door in Minneapolis. They targeted Somali nationals, arresting them without a warrant, and quickly spiriting them away to overcrowded detention facilities in Texas and Louisiana, hundreds of miles away from their family and their support networks. And the government did all this with, it turns out, no legal authority to do so whatsoever. IRAP and many others filed suit, both individual cases and a class action, seeking to halt this unprecedented program. Those cases have been a resounding success, with judges in Minnesota ordering the release of refugees in dozens of cases, and in the lead class action case, issuing an order requiring the release and return of all detained refugees back to Minnesota. The legal effort was part of the larger, incredible community response in Minnesota to the government's attacks on immigrants in that state. During the Operation Paris litigation, the Trump-Vance administration sought to paper over its unlawful actions with a so-called revetting policy, laying out the purported legal authority for arresting and detaining potentially indefinitely refugees without any criminal charge or any pending removal proceeding. Democracy Forward, the organization I work for, and IRAP, on behalf of several very brave individuals and organizational plaintiffs, including IINE, moved quickly to file suit in Massachusetts to halt this policy, procuring a nationwide injunction in March. Thankfully, as of today, DHS cannot currently implement this cruel, inhumane arrest and detention policy. I now like to turn things back to Jeff to discuss that case and IINE's role a bit more.
Thank you, Erez. So before we move into our panel discussion, I want to spend a few minutes talking about why IINE took the extraordinary step of filing a lawsuit against the United States government. In late February, alongside Jewish Family Service of Western Massachusetts and 6 brave refugee plaintiffs, IINE filed a lawsuit to block a sweeping Department of Homeland Security policy that ordered the warrantless arrest and potentially indefinite detention of lawfully admitted refugees if they do not have a green card 1 year after being in the United States. What makes this policy especially alarming is that refugees are legally prohibited from obtaining a green card until they have been in the United States for 1 full year. And even then, application processing is often delayed by the government itself. In other words, refugees were being threatened with detention for failing to meet a requirement that was impossible to meet. To be clear, suing the federal government is not a standard form of advocacy for IINE. It's not something we take lightly, but the core of our work and the very people we exist to protect and support were at immediate risk. We knew we had to stand up. I'm grateful to share, as Erez said, that in late March, the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts halted enforcement of what the administration has called its refugee detention policy. The court found that refugees and resettlement agencies would suffer irreparable harm and are likely to succeed on the merits of their claims. As a result, the Department of Homeland Security is prohibited from enforcing this policy while the case continues. This ruling was an important and necessary step, but it does not mean the threat has passed. It does mean that legal action matters and that standing up for refugees can make a difference.
Thank you so much, Jeff and Erez, for helping us understand some of the policy changes and some of the litigation that is hoping to prevent them going into full effect. Jeff, we're going to see you back at the end of the webinar. And now I'd like to turn to and invite a couple of my colleagues to join Erez and me in our panel discussion. So I'd like to welcome Rebecca LaPierre, IINE's Director of Immigration Legal Services. Innocent Ndagijimana, an intake specialist on IINE's education team in Manchester. Thank you both so much for being here today. And so to kick off our first question for our panel, Innocent and Rebecca, can you first please introduce yourselves and just share a little bit more about your work at IINE and your role?
Yep, I will start. Thank you so much, San. My name is Innocent Ndagijimana. I'm the intake specialist with IINE education program in Manchester. I'm also a former refugee and a former IINE client. I immigrated to the US back in 2014 from a Congolese refugee camp in Rwanda, where I lived for 18 years. But I moved here with my family, my parents, and 7 siblings. When we first got here, we faced some challenges. As you can imagine, having lived in the refugee camp for 18 years, for 20 years for my parents. So it was kind of difficult when we got here. But thanks to IINE, we were able to face the challenges, and I was able to pursue my education and graduated from university. So today I work for IINE with the education program, and looking back, education played a significant role in the success that I have achieved so far. So I'm happy to be in a position where I'm helping my fellow refugees and immigrants to pursue education and help and set themselves up for success.
Thank you so much, Innocent, for your work and for joining us and sharing your perspective today. Rebecca, let's go to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca LaPierre. I am the new Director of Immigration Legal Services at IINE. I have experience as a practicing attorney and also a background in the study of international human rights. At IINE, I lead a team of legal representatives and legal administrative staff who work directly with the immigrant communities throughout New England and are just really dedicated and wonderful individuals who are advocating for the immigrants in our communities.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm going to start with our first question. And Jeff and Erez really outlined, I think, some of the the policy changes. But what I'd like to ask each of you is, when you think about the political landscape in all of the changes that are happening and their implications, what do you find most concerning? And Erez, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks, Dan. From my perspective, both as a former longtime DOJ employee and now working on the other side of things, really what's quite startling and truly unprecedented is the speed with which the Trump-Vance administration is moving to implement policies, really flooding the zone with things they, in my view, know are illegal and that will eventually, in most cases, get set aside in court. But they are moving with all deliberate speed and breaking as many things as they can. And it's really designed to ensure that these things happen before advocates or the courts, and especially the individuals that are being targeted, can really stop and do anything about it. And that's just not the way the Department of Justice or the agencies and the executive branch have ever really conducted themselves. That is just, again, unprecedented. And related to that, really just disheartening, again, from the perspective both of someone that used to defend the government's actions, but also just as a citizen. It's just this idea that this percentage of the population apparently relishes causing immigrants intentional misery. And the government is achieving that through mass arrests and, again, flooding the zone with these policies that I just mentioned, inhumane detention, and just a general hostility and harassment in an effort to force migrants, from what I can tell, to self-deport, all while stacking the deck against immigrants in all the proceedings and interactions they have with the government, be it benefit processing at USCIS or the immigration courts through the Executive Office of Immigration Review.
Thank you, Erez. And it does feel like, from the standpoint of an organization that's built on welcoming people, this reversal toward engineered misery is breathtaking. Rebecca, what do you find most concerning?
Yeah, so it really seems that they are trying to systematically dismantle our legal immigration system, and creating all of these policies, they're making a really ambiguous situation where it's difficult for us to really plan or prepare clients for what to expect, because there's these new and, as Erez said, unprecedented policies that don't make logical sense, and are completely different from the standard we've seen in the past. So our clients are also confused, and they don't understand which policies are applying to them, or what it means, or how it might affect them, and becoming extremely confused and frustrated and scared, even if they've done nothing wrong and they've followed all the steps they were supposed to take. It makes this system, which was already incredibly complicated and confusing, even more so, and really difficult to navigate.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's innocent when you think about like how quickly things are changing and how uh, vague and like ambiguous as Rebecca described, and how unprecedented. What's your sort of take on what is most challenging, maybe from your perspective and from clients' perspectives?
Right. So today's political climate is obviously far less welcoming to immigrants and refugee, for example, than when my family first arrived a decade ago. So today you see some political leaders generalizing immigrants as criminals, and you see many political rhetoric that demonize immigrants. And so this causes fear and uncertainty, and it also causes emotional stress in refugee communities. There is a confusion in refugee communities over who wants me here or who does not. And so it's very, very concerning. And just to give you an example of how different things are today comparing to when we moved here, when we came here in 2014, we will be in our apartment with my siblings, and if someone knocked on a door, we would all run to the door, excited to open the door. And, often it was a volunteer with donations, and it was an IINE staff member just taking us to our medical appointment or things like that. So we didn't have any fear whatsoever back then. But today, if someone was to knock on a door of a refugee or immigrant, then they will be worried. They will have fear. They will worry that it may be an ICE agent, maybe knocking on a door. So they would hesitate to open the door for the fear that it may be ICE agents. And that's very unfortunate because as refugees, we come to the USA seeking safety, stability, and the chance to rebuild our life after war and displacement. The US is literally perceived as heaven for many refugees before coming here. Well, now that does not feel like the case anymore under the current political climate.
Thank you, Innocent. And like again, it feels like there's such a shift from really the idea or the promise of refuge to this sort of level of fear and threat. Um, so you've touched on this a little bit, but I want to now ask each of you, like, what are people in your role that you're connected with, individuals or populations or your community, worrying about the most? themselves. And Erez, let's start with you.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this and looking at this from a institutional perspective, again, having at one point been on the other side of this as a government attorney. And what's really striking, more so, again, not to use this word a lot, unprecedented, really, is we now have an executive branch that relishes, in my view, disregarding the Constitution and the rule of law and seeing what really they can get away with and daring anyone to stop them. And up until this point, even in situations where the same party occupied the White House and the Congress, you would have pushback. You would have Congress performing some, although it's been decreasing year after year, some function as a co-equal branch of government. And that's just completely gone since the inauguration of the second Trump administration. Congress, who, under the system that's established under our Constitution, is in fact the entity that is supposed to establish laws and regulate immigration, and the executive implements those laws, is just not showing up. It's just asleep at the switch, and I think by design, allowing the executive to do whatever it wants. So that leaves the third branch of government, the judiciary, which, as I mentioned, we've had some success in the courts, but that's a lot of pressure to put on one branch of government when this depends on all three branches of government showing up. And related to that, about the courts, the immigration courts, and I know this from some cases that we've brought here at Democracy Forward, and also just generally seeing what's happening. The immigration courts, people think of them as courts, and everyone's entitled to their day in court and due process. But the immigration courts are not independent courts. They don't exist separate from the executive branch. They, in fact, are housed within the Department of Justice, under the direction of whoever happens to be in charge of the Department of Justice, which, according to the current occupant of the White House, is him. So going to court, you used to be able to get a fair day in court. And, a lot of people would win, people would lose, but the cases would progress in a normal way. And eventually they'd get to the courts of appeals, where cases that arise in the immigration courts get to. But what this administration has done, more so than I've ever seen before, is just erect block after burden that makes it nearly impossible for most people, unless they are very well represented. And that's most people going through immigration court proceedings are not represented. Something like 70% are pro se, meaning they don't have counsel. And so they've established policy after policy, which basically weaponizes the immigration courts and makes it nigh impossible to get your day in court. And while you are, in theory, entitled to eventually appeal to a federal court, the Court of Appeals for where you happen to be, very few people, under the policies that the government has put in place, if those policies are left unchecked, will in fact be able to effectuate that right.
Thanks, Erez, for really outlining some of the greatest, like you said, institutional concerns. Rebecca, for those people who need their day in court, that you serve, what are you seeing as being sort of most worrying?
Yeah, so in addition to these fears that we've talked about of having their status revoked or being detained or removed from the country, and in addition to all of the confusion we've discussed, where people don't know what to expect or what impacts these policies will have on their cases, we're also seeing a lot of practical, tangible consequences in the immediate sense. A lot of our clients are struggling to obtain the documentation that they need to show their work authorization or get a new license or state ID. It's making it difficult for them to maintain work. And while their applications are processing and delayed for significant amounts of time, they aren't really able to move forward in life. A lot of these delays also result in an inability for them to reunite with family members who are still overseas. A lot of our clients are separated from their family for years and years. We have clients who've never met their own children because they left when their spouse was pregnant. They don't see an end in sight, and that's because these applications are so delayed and the process is so unclear. And it's not safe for them to return to those hope countries. As we've discussed, that's sort of inherently the meaning of being a refugee. It's not safe for them to go back or to see their families. And it's really difficult for them to travel even to another country because that could negatively implicate their current applications that have not been decided as well.
Um, I mean, I think one of the goals of having this conversation is also to help people understand, like you were saying, how critical and dependent people are on their legal status. And on that note, let's just talk more about the US government's plan to actually re-vet some of the refugees who we described at the beginning as being, having gone through years and years of vetting before coming here. But the government plan to re-vet and potentially revoke refugee status. So, in Erez, is that even legal?
Well, we certainly don't think so. And thankfully, as both Jeff and I mentioned earlier, a judge in Massachusetts has thus far agreed. Um, so look, interviews have always been a part of the official green card application process, including for refugees. But for decades, the practice, the policy, the regulations on the books were applied that these were really the exception, not the norm. The presumption was, I mean, refugees are, as was mentioned before, the most heavily scrutinized and well-vetted immigrant population in this country. And so up until recently, the government behaved in a way that believed that to be the case. So interviews did happen if there was a reason for interviews to happen, but it was never the norm, and it was for sure not categorically mandatory. And it did not come accompanied with ICE agents showing up in the middle of the night, arresting you without a warrant and detaining you far away from family and friends. So that's what's really changed with this so-called revetting policy. The government now assumes or takes the position that every refugee, though notably refugees that were admitted during the Biden administration primarily, for what that's worth, but the rhetoric is not so limited. But every refugee, no matter what, must be assumed to be committing some sort of fraud or some sort of crime and is inherently suspect. And so not only must be interviewed, no matter what, but detained during that process out of a government invented concern that refugees will somehow abscond to back to where they fled from, and none of it makes logical sense. And that's what's really unprecedented. Contrary to decades of settled practice, the government now hasn't found the authority to detain lawfully admitted refugees who are not in removal proceedings, who have not committed any crime, and who until this point in time would have never been treated this way by the United States.
Innocent, we're so grateful for your perspective because you've actually been through this application and original vetting process as a refugee and have personal experience. Can you provide some of the insights into that process and how you feel about this revetting?
Yes, yes. So first, I feel like revetting is very, very unnecessary. Before resettlement to the US, like we refugees go through a long vetting process. We go through like interviews after interviews from refugee support centers, and then we do more interviews with immigration offices. We do like medical checkups and cultural orientation. Each step take months, and there is a waiting period. Like after interviewing, you wait a couple months to be called and then do more interviews. And it takes a long time. For my family, it took about 3 years to go through the entire process and actually move here to the States. And I know for many families, it took even longer than 3 years to go through the entire process. So any addition or removal of a family member could add months to the process. So we used to joke back in the refugee camp, like once your family start the resettlement process, like be very careful not to have a new baby in the family because that would mean more time that you have to wait. And we used to talk to our sisters and the other siblings, like, be careful, don't get married because that means you have to be removed from the household. So wait until we get there and you can do that process. And God forbid if you were to lose a family member like because of death, that means you will also have to wait longer. So there's no question that the process is long and complex. And I feel like the revetting is unnecessary and it's a waste of time and the resources that can be used to do other important things.
Yeah. I mean, Rebecca, Innocent just said like some families have had organized their entire lives around the original vetting process. So I imagine anyone having to go through revetting would need legal counsel. So from that perspective, how are we preparing clients for the potential for a revetting interview?
Yeah, so it's difficult to truly prepare because this idea of re-vetting is so unprecedented that it's hard to know what to expect. We are seeing an increase in green card interviews, but that's not the limitation of these policies. But even the green card interviews were not common for refugees prior to this time. Uh, what we can do is we can prepare clients for what we know from experience with green card interviews in the past, which includes taking the time to meet with our clients, explain what they can expect at the interview, go through sample questions so that they have some idea of what's likely to be asked in a mock interview scenario. We will review what was in their green card application. If we have access to it, we'll review what was in their refugee application, which is critically important for the revetting process. And just make sure they remember what's in there because, as Innocent mentioned, these processes take years, and most people don't remember what they said or did or wrote down several years ago, whether it was for the refugee application or their green card application that's been processing for a lengthy period of time. We try to help clients obtain those documents from their original interviews and from the original application process. Um, and then we try to prepare clients for the experience of having to relive traumatizing experiences or talk about the persecution that they faced in their home country again, which is difficult to do and difficult to remember what you described in your original interview as well. So we try to make our clients feel more confident and prepared to address any concerns they have about these interviews or anxiety about what could happen at the interview and just make them feel more prepared.
Thank you. I mean, it just sounds so nerve-wracking. And it also sounds that like the individual stakes because of these policy changes are so high. So I'm going to ask you all, what are the long-term stakes if these policies go unchallenged? And Innocent, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you, San. So the long-term stakes, if these policies keep going unchallenged, will be to have an immigrants and refugee community that don't feel like they belong or that don't feel like they're welcome in the United States. And that's very unfortunate because immigrants and refugees are hardworking people and they contribute significantly to the US economy when given opportunity. This is a community that know how it's like to not have opportunities. Having lived in a refugee camp, like living only to survive until the next day, we do feel like now that we're here, we can be open and plan for a meaningful life in the future and improve our well-being, but also we're contributing to the to the economy of the nation. And so we need to feel welcome and supported in order to do that. And if these policies keep going unchallenged, it will negatively affect immigrants and refugees, but it will also affect the economy of the country.
Yeah, thank you. Such an important point that contribution sort of a two-way street, right? So you need to feel safe and need to be allowed to prepare in order to contribute in your community. Rebecca, how about you? If the policies are able to stay in place, go unchallenged, what are the longer term stakes?
Well, these policies create really substantial burdens on our immigration system, which is already overburdened. It takes away resources from these agencies that could be dedicated to processing legitimate applications for members of our community who deserve to be here and build their lives. Instead of these members of our communities being able to access support or find a job or be able to rebuild their life, they end up sort of stuck and distressed. It results in our economy and our communities being weaker, and it really isn't a path to make our community safer or stronger.
Yeah. I think I heard today, or maybe yesterday, that the backlog of cases at USAS has like never been higher. So I understand. What a crazy implication for these policies being unchallenged. Erez, what would you contribute?
Yeah. And again, it's really disappointing, having been in government, to see this, but the Trump-Vance administration wants very much to villainize immigrants of all stripes, so that Americans look the other way when the government violates the law, violates due process, violates their rights. In case after case, the administration, in the courts of public opinion, as I mentioned before, alleges without any evidence that migrant communities are rife with fraudsters, criminals, terrorists even. And this somehow justifies violating their rights, because why would you, the average American, support terrorists? It's fine what they're doing, because they're fighting terrorism. Just labeling people without evidence and then doing terrible things to them is somehow okay. And we know on top of that that the administration has been violating or circumventing, at this point in a year and a half into the administration, literally hundreds of court orders specifically in the space of immigration rights and litigation, which is astounding. So it shouldn't surprise anyone. I feel this way. We cannot normalize this. This is really beyond the pale. It's really a do or die moment for us as citizens and community members. Because if an attack on our immigrant communities, and if they get away with it, what's next? It's an attack on all of us. And so if they can do it to our immigrant friends, our neighbors, they can do that to anyone. And that's really, we've got to push back against that with everything we've got.
Thanks. That was so well put. And I think like part of the reason we're having town halls and trying to bring people together to understand is because of that greatest stake, that any changes to policies that are unlawful and unfair could eventually affect every single person who lives under those laws. Which is a lot and a lot to sort of digest. And I know that those of us been in the work a long time or a short time, our hearts are hurting. But in the face of all of that, we're still going. We're still fighting. And I just want to ask you as our last question, each of you, what helps you like personally maintain hope? And Rebecca, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, I'd say our clients really make me feel hopeful because they still remain optimistic that despite all of this fear and all of this anxiety and every challenge that they're that they're facing, they still want to be here. They still want to be members of our communities. They want to believe the best in the people around them. They want to bring their families here and build their lives. It's inspiring to witness, and we work with such incredible people who've been through so much. And to see them maintain hope gives me hope. Uh, they know that there are still people here who want to support them despite what the news or our government's actions may suggest. And in addition to that, having colleagues both inside and outside of IINE who continue to fight, who continue to care, keep doing what needs to be done and showing up every day, even though, as you mentioned, Zan, our hearts hurt, but we show up every day and my colleagues show up every day, and that really helps me to maintain hope.
Thanks. And it always sort of reminds me of at the end of the day, our clients are always leading the way for us. So I really appreciate your comment around they're hopeful themselves. They haven't given up hope, many people. Erez, how about you? What gives you hope?
Uh, Really, it comes down to the fact that litigation matters and litigation works. And it may not feel this way sometimes amid all the noise, but that's just what it is, noise. Since inauguration, the organizations, individuals, communities have filed more than 780 lawsuits as of the latest information that I have. Been filed against the Trump-Vance administration against all manner of policies, executive orders, and actions. And the Trump-Vance administration is losing a lot more than it's winning. Now, their loss rate fluctuates, but since January 20th, 2025, it's been somewhere between 70 and 80%. And another interesting data point, they've faced losses in front of judges from all political parties appointed by Republican or Democrat presidents, including judges appointed by President Trump himself. So this is not a clean left, right, blue, red thing at all in the courts. Policies are being slowed down and in many cases stopped. And to just take our case on behalf of IINE and others, and IRAP's case in Minnesota arising out of Operation Paris. For 4 months now, refugees have been able to sleep a little easier because the government's speed run into violating refugee rights has been halted. That doesn't mean we can rest easy, but it does mean that what we and many others are doing is working, and that's what gives me hope.
Well, I mean, I can't really thank you and your organization and other organizations enough for showing us how much litigation works and how there's still so much we can protect. Um, it it really does give me hope too. And Innocent, let's end with you and your experiences and what gives you hope.
Right. Xan, what gives me hope is that there are individuals and organizations that are actively standing up to challenge these harmful policies and defend refugees and immigrants. I am hopeful because I see my colleagues continuing to show up every day and doing the right things by serving, our clients with education, employment, social services, and advocating and sharing the true stories, which I think is essential to correcting misinformation and really helping people understand the real contribution of immigrants. And so I'm grateful to be in a position where I can speak about this. And also, I am in a particular position where I can communicate with my fellow refugees and immigrants and tell them that there is hope and there is a welcoming community despite current challenges.
I love that note for us to conclude on. And, I do feel like the three things that I heard that are incredibly hopeful, and also the reason why I think it's the right fight is number one, litigation's working. Number two, people still feel like being here is valuable. Amazing. And then number three, what Innocent said, injustice is mobilizing advocacy and mobilizing those who are concerned to really get involved and to fight. And I think that that's honestly the way we're gonna change and kind of, as Erez said, stop normalizing this or prevent the normalization and move back to something much more just. Thank you all. Thank you, Erez, Rebecca, and Innocent for your time and your contribution and your incredible work. And now we're going to shift to some audience questions. And I have a whole list here, and thank you for writing in. You can keep them coming. But the first question is from a listener. I've read that ICE is now regularly showing up at courts. How do you address the risks of showing up or not showing up for hearings? Erez or Rebecca, I want to take that one.
I can respond. So when we give legal advice, it has to be on a case-by-case basis regardless. But if in terms of the criminal courts or state courts, it is important that people still do what they need to do and not put themselves in a position of getting into more trouble by not showing up. But that is a legitimate fear and risk. We have seen stories like that. It's one of those things where we would generally tell someone to go talk to their criminal attorney about as well and make sure that they have clear guidance about if it's a criminal case, for instance. So it's a legitimate risk, but it's also it's not something we can tell people to not do. They still have to show up if they have an order to be there.
Yeah, I think that you're touching on one of the sort of greatest challenges and personal sort of decisions around risk. Okay, second question. Can you comment on the racial discrimination of the government policies? Who wants to start?
I can comment on that because that's actually one of our key claims in our case in Boston and challenging the refugee revetting policy. And it's also a claim in many cases because what we're seeing and have seen both in rhetoric and in actions since January of 2025, but even before in statements from the president and his surrogates, that this administration is inherently hostile to non-white migration to this country. And they are taking as many actions as they can to make it very difficult for people who are not white and not European to migrate to this country. As I mentioned before, the only refugees who are being processed for admission are white South Africans, and they're being processed in such a way that raises a lot of questions. They are not being subjected to the careful, extensive vetting that you heard about earlier from some of our panelists. And then, of course, you have the visa processing bans, the USCIS benefit adjudication bans that are targeting nationals of countries that are primarily in Africa, Asia, and South America. No European country is on that list. And look, one example, two examples, maybe that's not really a trend, but this is happening in case after case after case. And so what we're seeing a lot of litigation-wise is we are raising, and many organizations are raising, equal protection claims in our cases. And equal protection is a provision of the Constitution in the 14th Amendment and the 5th Amendment, which says you cannot discriminate on the basis of race or national origin, among other things, when you distribute the government's power or implement the government's authority. It's early days yet in some of the litigation, including our case in Boston, but there have been other cases, particularly in the context of TPS, temporary protected status, which have had success in arguing that termination of protected status for various nationalities was based in part on racial animus. And so there is success in advancing those claims in the courts happening.
Thank you. I mean, as an organization who's received and sort of many TPS holders, many from Haiti, we see on sort of the front lines the impact of this sort of undercurrent of racism. Okay, here's another question, a little more technical. An audience member, I would love to hear from your thoughts on how revetting applies to Afghan refugees who entered the US under the Biden administration and have green card applications in process.
So this policy applies to any refugees who entered the US during the Biden administration, essentially. And that does include the Afghan refugees who entered during that time period.
Great. Erez, this one maybe for you. Erez says it's a do or die situation. How would you suggest we push back? I'm not a lawyer and I live in a state, Massachusetts, where my representatives are already pushing back.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is vote this fall, although that may not be the answer you're looking for out of Massachusetts. But I think voting matters even within parties. There are those that are more pro-immigrant and there are those that are more middle of the road or more status quo. Voting matters, and a lot can change if even one house or one chamber of Congress flips, because now an opposition party has the power of the subpoena. To the extent you can, you're fortunate enough to have resources, donate to groups that are doing the litigation or the policy work that you believe in, that matter to you, IINE, they're doing great work. They're also our clients, so I might be a little biased, but groups doing this work are overwhelmed, and the government, the Trump-Vance administration, has stripped funding from many groups from day one and has made it exceedingly difficult for these groups to do the work they were previously able to do with less resources, less stress, less panic. So supporting these groups is every little bit counts. I think that's another way to help, even if you're not a lawyer, even if you're not working for a legal organization. And just a sense of community. Check in with your neighbors. check in with your immigrant neighbors, see how they're doing, see how things are going, see if you can help out in that way, because visibility is always makes it always more difficult for the government to do something than if someone is anonymous and unknown and hidden from your eye. So just check in with your neighbors. And
Jeff, did you want to also comment on our advocacy efforts and sort of what Erez said about now's the time to really start contributing to organizations that are leading the charge?
Yes, I would. Thanks, Sam. I mean, I think, this is the time to get involved as a volunteer, to reach out to maybe people in other states, to convince them to support candidates who favor immigration. I think, as Erez said, contributing to organizations like IINE, Democracy Forward, that are on the front lines doing this work every day is vitally important. There are volunteer opportunities. And I think saying good things about immigrants and refugees is very important. Saying how important they are, spreading the word around your community and really around the country through friends that we need immigrants and refugees here. They're vital. They're vital to our communities. They've made our country what it is today, and we need to be welcoming. And also, would add one little thing, and that is that you know, we have seen throughout our 100 plus year history at IINE that the vast majority of people welcome immigrants and refugees. They welcome new neighbors and want to help them. And so we just need to keep doing that.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to take one more question really quickly, and then we're going to move to wrapping up. Is there anything one can do to offer refuge to a refugee or immigrant in danger of being illegally deported? Anyone got ideas? I mean, I guess I would say, sort of going back to the last question, there's whole organizations that are designed to support refugee and immigrant communities, and getting in touch with them and figuring out how you can volunteer, how you can donate, and how you can support them, I think is one of the best ways to try to lend your time, your treasure into protecting communities and people. I think that the indiscriminate sort of the potential detention of our communities means that there's no one who's sort of completely safe. And I would say it's really important to get to an organization that has the connections with individuals in the communities that are most at risk, and talk to them and try to figure out what is the best way that you can individually support them.
I would
Anyone?
add to
Yeah.
that, Zan.
Yeah.
Sorry, I would just add to that if they don't have a lawyer, help them find one. If they need resources to get a lawyer, give them resources to get a lawyer. It's really important that immigrants have legitimate legal advice right now, and it can be challenging to find an immigration attorney, but it's very important that immigrants have good advice.
Yeah, I would also say here in the Commonwealth, the state has set up the Massachusetts Assistance to Counsel Initiative. And so there are lawyers and there is funding. And so I don't have the number. We don't have the number. We can kind of get it out later, but there's a number you can dial. And there's also, you get on the website of the state of Massachusetts. There are ways to get to attorneys who can help clients. And that is, as Rebecca said, the best way forward.
Thank you. And that's gonna really move us into our wrap up. And I want to just thank all of our participants again and our panelists, because your perspectives are so hard earned and so valuable to our entire community. So thank you so much. And on the note of what we just talking about, I feel that the opportunity to get involved has never been more important to us. As Jeff said, there's lots of resources available to our immigrant communities, but they all operate on shoestring budgets, and more than ever before, particularly legal services. Us in sort of practicing legal services, Democracy Now! In holding up the line around litigation and fighting. These are really, really critical organizations we are so lucky to have, so that they are really the sort of last line of defense for both the people who are enduring these challenges in the communities, as well as the laws that we all live with under and enjoy and want to protect. So that requires a whole community. We put up on the slide a bunch of different ways that you can get involved in our work. You can support us financially. People always ask, that doesn't seem like enough. I want to get involved personally. It is personal. It is the most important thing we could possibly ask for. We have so many people want to get involved in the work. Even that takes coordinating and managing to have everyone have a really good experience. So donations are the most important way you can contribute to any of these nonprofits. That's just the bottom line. Having said all of that, you can also volunteer, which is incredibly important and helpful. And you don't have to do either. You could do them both. Volunteers really play a critical role in supporting our organizations, as well as the families that are still here in all of this chaos and all of these threats, rebuilding their lives, moving forward. We didn't talk a lot about this, but there are people moving forward every single day, despite all of these odds. And those include people who are medically, like need medical services. We have people who are really young and youth in our programs. We have people who are learning how to speak English. All of these services take resources as well to help them continue to move forward, particularly now in the face of all of these challenges. And then the final thing is you can join us and using your voice. And there are many different advocacy opportunities. IINE has established an advocacy community. The easiest thing you can do is just sign up for the mailing list. You can receive all of our updates. We have action alerts. We have opportunities to come together. We do virtual meetings. It's really easy and accessible to get involved. And then we'll find ways and sort of organize you and help you organize in ways that help protect and defend refugee protections. Because I think at the end of all of this, the last sort of parting words we'd like to say is that policy decisions only change when enough people speak up and protect them. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to invite Jeff back to close us out. And again, thank you to all of our amazing panelists.
We thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. I want to thank Innocent and Rebecca and Alexandra, and especially Erez for being here, Erez, and also thank Erez for being our lead counsel in the case we have in the federal court. We appreciate all that all of you do for IINE, for all the questions and the involvement and the engagement, and we'll see you soon at the next webinar or the next event.